We find ourselves here in 2013 celebrating and commemorating the 100th-year anniversary of the 1913 lockout, and I think it's in a very important time we're living through at the moment, and there are many lessons to be learned from the Dublin lockout. I think firstly one important thing we should do when looking back to 1913 is to place it in its wider context. There was an international movement of workers fighting against, in essence, capitalism, against the employing class. For 3 decades up to the First World War, there was major battles, huge industrial militancy on the part of workers against their employers, from the 1890s into the 20th century and all the way up to 1910 to 1914 is a period in which it's referred to as the Great Unrest. And I think it's very important to say at the outset that Ireland at that time in 1913 was still a part of the United Kingdom. Home Rule, which had been on the statute books for just over a year, nearly 2 years, meant that there was a sense that Home Rule was going to be granted sooner rather than later by the Liberals in power. And the Home Rule Party, the Irish Parliamentary Party, believed that they were on the cusp of gaining independence. It begged the question that in an independent Ireland, who was going to be more powerful? Was it going to be the working class or the capitalist, the native Irish capitalist class? And I think it asked of everyone in Ireland at that time, well, which side were they on? Were they on the side of the workers, or were they on the side of the bosses? We saw very clearly that the workers of Dublin didn't have many friends. The Catholic Church, the press, mainly owned, or in large part owned by William Martin Murphy, the leading figure of the Dublin employers. The Home Rule Party played a disgraceful role in not supporting, a nationalist party in not supporting the workers of Dublin. The lockout is generally seen, I think it's personified by two figures, those of Jim Larkin, the leader of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, the ITGW, and William Martin Murphy, who was the biggest Irish capitalist of his day, who owned not only the Irish Independent and the Evening Herald, so he was a media mogul. He owned the Imperial Hotel, the Dublin Tramway Company, and had many investments abroad in major railway companies. In 1911 alone, Larkin and his union showed major support to the dockers in Liverpool, who were on a major strike at the time, even paying out strike pay for the workers at that time. So huge expressions of solidarity been shown there, back and forth across the Irish Sea. And 1911, at that time, the ITGW had grown significantly, having been founded in 1908. By 1911 it had 30,000 members, and Larkin had claimed, and I think he's right to have claimed, that Dublin was the best organised city in Europe. Now William Martin Murphy could see this, he knew this, he realised what a threat that organised workers could be, particularly the kind of organised workers that Larkin had, which was a militant trade unionism. It was going against the established norms of trade unionism at the time, which was conciliation, arbitration, sitting down and responsibly working with the employers to come to some kind of an arrangement over specific issues in specific sectors of the economy. Well, the fact is, Larkin and many others like him saw trade unionism as a class weapon rather than an instrument of class compromise. So William Martin Murphy, the leading capitalist of his day, he arranged to set up the Dublin Employers Federation, which was a gang of hostile brothers, 404 of them, who came together and created a document which basically instructed their workers to not only do everything that they say, that their employer says, but that they had to renounce, if they were a member of Larkin's union, they had to renounce their membership of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union. They set out to crush this Larkinism in Dublin, and so ensued a major confrontation, in essence locking out, with the workers and the families standing behind them, some 100,000 people right across the city of Dublin, which is probably, I think it was about a third of the population of that time. But they did face a powerful movement of working class solidarity, which is the core of what Larkinism stood for, which was that no worker would be isolated, that working class solidarity, sympathetic strike, tainted goods. If one worker went on strike, the rest of the workers would come out on strike. The unskilled would be protected by the skilled, and vice versa. That one sector, that a docker, if he went out on strike, the railway man would come out in sympathetic strike and force the capitalist class on the back foot. So that was the core of Larkinism. We saw very quickly the state moving in to back up Murphy and the rest of the capitalist class. It showed that the power of the Dublin Metropolitan Police and Dublin Castle behind them, who William Martin Murphy had approached about a week before he decided to lock out his workers. It showed the power of the state to roll in behind the capitalist class, which we saw the full teeth of over the next 6 months, as a huge wave of violence directed against the workers and their families took place, with raids taking place, very vindictive raids taking place in many of the poorest parts of the city. People's homes been trashed, and we saw also that the scabs that were brought in by the employers to try break the will of the striking workers, many of them were armed. The tramway men, the Dublin tramway men, they were armed, but any worker that took up a gun was immediately arrested and would be served with a huge sentence. These workers, these brave men and women of Dublin could have won. They really could have won. They were so courageous going out on strike, enduring the hardship that they did for as long as they did. But they could have won if, as Larkin and James Connolly had demanded and had done previously in 1911, when Larkin showed solidarity and actually backed it up with strike pay for the dockers in Liverpool. If the British Trade Union Congress had been able to not only send all the food and funds that it did, they were looking for strike action. That if the British Trade Union movement had actually decided that they were going to support the workers of Dublin in their fight against the Irish capitalists, they could have isolated Dublin. They could have refused to handle their goods. But sadly, despite the huge level of support amongst the British working class, who showed unbelievable generosity themselves, but this was stifled by their trade union leaders. They were more interested in containing their own rank and file, in keeping their rank and file, the militancy of their own members down, rather than supporting the workers of Dublin. By early January, the Irish Transport and General Workers Union were saying to the members to return to work, to try go in on as good conditions as you can, and to try not sign that employer's document which was demanding that the workers renounce the union. Many workers did return, many didn't. They didn't get their jobs back, they were sacked, they were blacklisted. Those who did go back to work, many of them were victimised. One of the lessons that we have to learn is that at that time Larkin believed, and many others, that industrially they were going to take on the employers, that they could, with the power of solidarity, they could create one big union that could industrially put the employers on the back foot and ultimately defeat them, and that workers could take control of industry. But that sadly would not have been enough, and it wasn't enough, because we saw the role of the state, which at that time was the British state. We saw William Martin Murphy approach Dublin Castle a week before he locked out his workers. We saw what Dublin Castle did, supplying the Dublin Metropolitan Police with carte blanche to go beat and actually murder workers on the streets of Dublin. Larkin and Connolly and others in the Irish trade union movement at that time viewed the state as somewhat neutral. They thought that they could bring socialism through the ballot box, which is why in essence they set up the Reformist Party in 1912, the Irish Labour Party. They thought that industrially they could create one big union of all workers together that could take on the employers and ultimately take over industry, and that through the ballot box they could bring about a socialist transformation. Sadly, that ignores the role of the state. Is one major reason why the defeat was as harsh and a crushing blow to the huge upsurge of militancy at that time, was that there wasn't a wider context put in. And I think the role of a revolutionary party at that time, I think Marx had learned the lesson in 1870, and Lenin in Russia was learning the lesson and putting out his theory at this time, that you needed a revolutionary party in which to contextualise any defeat that the working class suffered, and could see it as just one part of a wider fight against the capitalist system. But that being said, I think there are many lessons that the Irish left here today, and all of us right across Irish society can learn from the lockout. It's suffering a crisis of capitalism since 2007-2008, and it is the working class most certainly paying for it. Workers have had their rights repeatedly targeted. Trade unionism is seen as something that's old-fashioned, that we need to move on. We need to have labour activation measures. Some of the most exploited workers have little or no protections in their workplace. So the very notion of trade unionism, I think, needs to be not only defended as a force for good, that every worker should be in a trade union, but that we need to rediscover, because similar to the leadership of the trade unions back in 1913, we have the leadership of trade unions here in Ireland today who aren't doing what they should do. The trade union leadership have betrayed the rank and file members, and I think it's going to be a slow process, but the rank and file members are fighting back. So it shows that we need to rediscover that spirit, because we're being crushed at the moment, absolutely crushed. Like the workers in Dublin 100 years ago were being crushed. That we need to find that sense of Larkinism, that it's solidarity amongst the working class, that an injury to one is the concern of all,